The rain drummed against the windows of my corner office on the 40th floor of the Willis Tower, each drop a tiny percussion note in the symphony of my unraveling marriage. I stared out at the Chicago skyline, watching the evening lights flicker to life like scattered diamonds on black velvet, and wondered when exactly Sarah and I had stopped talking about anything that mattered. 23 years. That's how long we'd been married. 23 years of mortgage payments, parent-teacher conferences, family vacations to Wisconsin Dells, and gradually growing apart without either of us having the courage to acknowledge it. I was Mike Henderson, Senior Vice President of Strategic Development at Morrison & Associates, a consulting firm that specialized in corporate restructuring. At 47, I had everything I'd worked for, a six-figure salary, a house in Naperville with a 3-car garage, 2 kids in college, and a wife who barely looked up from her phone when I walked through the door. "Mike, you ready for Dallas?" My assistant Jennifer knocked on the glass door, holding a manila folder thick with client files. The McKinnon Industries account was worth $12 million to our firm, and they'd specifically requested me to handle their operational overhaul. 3 days in Dallas, probably working 16-hour days, but it would secure my position for another year. Almost. Just need to call Sarah and let her know I'm heading to O'Hare. I picked up my phone, then set it down again. When was the last time Sarah had actually cared when I traveled? She'd probably just mumble something about picking up dinner for herself and Emma, our youngest, who was home from Northwestern for spring break. The flight to Dallas was turbulent, matching my mood. I found myself thinking about the previous weekend, when I'd suggested we drive up to Lake Geneva for a romantic getaway. Sarah had looked at me like I'd suggested we move to Mars. "We just went somewhere last year," she'd said, though I couldn't remember when that had been. Instead, she'd spent Saturday at her book club and Sunday doing laundry with the bedroom door closed, claiming she needed to concentrate. The Omni Hotel in downtown Dallas was everything you'd expect from a business traveler's temporary home: marble lobby, efficient staff, rooms that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner, and ambition. I checked in around 9 p.m., ordered room service, and called Sarah. It went straight to voicemail. Her phone had been going straight to voicemail a lot lately. "Hey, it's me. Just wanted to let you know I made it safely. The hotel is nice. I'll probably be working late tomorrow, so don't wait up for my call. Love you." The words felt hollow, like coins dropped into an empty well. The next morning brought the kind of brutal sunshine that makes everything look too sharp, too real. The McKinnon Industries headquarters sat in the heart of the Dallas Arts District, a gleaming testament to oil money and corporate ambition. James McKinnon himself, a silver-haired Texan who wore his wealth like a comfortable old jacket, greeted me in his corner office. "Mike, good to see you. Heard great things about your work with Patterson Steel." He gestured toward a leather chair that probably cost more than most people's cars. "We've got a real mess on our hands here. 3 divisions hemorrhaging money, unions threatening to strike, and a board of directors who couldn't find their way out of a paper bag with a map and a flashlight." For the next 8 hours, I immersed myself in spreadsheets, organizational charts, and the complex dynamics of a company that had grown too fast and lost its way. It was exactly the kind of challenge I lived for, the type of problem that made me forget everything else. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't have moods or hidden agendas or secret book clubs that lasted 6 hours. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dad, tried calling Mom but she's not answering. Can you ask her to transfer money for groceries? Also, weird question, but do you know if she's taken up photography? There's all this camera equipment in the garage." Camera equipment. Sarah had never shown any interest in photography. She could barely figure out how to use the camera on her iPhone. I texted back that I'd handle the grocery money and tried calling Sarah again. Voicemail. That night, back in my hotel room, I found myself staring at the ceiling and trying to remember the last time Sarah and I had made love. It had to have been at least 2 months, maybe 3. She'd been claiming she was tired a lot lately, going to bed earlier, waking up later. When I'd suggested we see a counselor, she'd laughed it off. "We're fine, Mike. Just in a rut. All couples go through this." But were we fine? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I knew about Sarah's daily life. She'd quit her job at the real estate office 3 years ago, claiming she wanted to focus on herself for a while. I'd supported the decision, figuring we could afford it and maybe she'd find something she was passionate about. But what was she doing with her time? I pulled out my laptop and, feeling slightly ridiculous, logged into our joint checking account. Sarah had her own credit card, of course, but the statements came to my email since I handled our finances. I scrolled through the recent transactions, looking for anything unusual. Starbucks, Whole Foods, Target, the usual suspects. But then I saw something that made me pause. Angelo's Camera Shop, $847. The date was 2 weeks ago. Then another charge, B&H Photo, $1,200. And another, Photography Workshop Chicago, $350. My wife had spent over $2,000 on photography equipment and classes without mentioning it to me. Not that she needed my permission, but in 23 years of marriage, we'd always discussed major purchases. When I'd wanted to buy a new set of golf clubs for $600, we'd talked about it for a week. I closed the laptop and tried to rationalize it. Maybe she wanted to surprise me. Maybe she was planning to turn it into a business. Maybe she was just exploring a new hobby. But why the secrecy? And why wasn't she answering her phone? The second day in Dallas passed in a blur of meetings, presentations, and the kind of corporate politics that required careful navigation. McKinnon was pleased with my preliminary recommendations, but implementation would take months. We were talking about a potential long-term contract, the kind that could set me up for early retirement if I wanted it. During a lunch break, I called Emma. "Hey, sweetie, how are things at home?" "Kind of weird, Dad. Mom's been going out a lot in the evenings. Says she's taking a class, but she's all dressed up when she leaves. Like, really dressed up. And she bought this new perfume that smells nothing like the stuff she usually wears. The sandwich I was eating suddenly tasted like cardboard." "What kind of class?" "She said it was photography, but Dad, the classes are at the community center and they end at 9. She's not getting home until after 11. And yesterday I saw her checking her appearance in the hallway mirror like 3 times before she left." After we hung up, I sat in the McKinnon Industries cafeteria, surrounded by the buzz of conversations about quarterly projections and market shares, and felt like I was drowning. My wife was lying to me. There was no other way to interpret it. The question was, lying about what? That evening, instead of working in my hotel room, I found myself walking through downtown Dallas, past the Reunion Tower with its spinning lights, through the West End Historic District where couples strolled hand in hand. I ended up at a sports bar called Champions, where I ordered a whiskey and tried to make sense of my life. The bartender, a guy about my age with kind eyes and withered hands, noticed me nursing my drink. "Business trip?" "Yeah. Consulting work." I took another sip. "Can I ask you something? You ever been married?" 26 years next month." "Why? How do you know if your wife is having an affair?" He stopped polishing glasses and looked at me directly. "You don't know. You suspect, you worry, you drive yourself crazy trying to read signs. But you don't know until you know, if you catch my meaning. What would you do? If you suspected? Same thing you're probably going to do. Go home and find out for sure. Because living with the not knowing will kill you slower than the knowing ever could." I finished my whiskey and walked back to the hotel through streets that smelled like barbecue and diesel fumes. In my room, I made a decision. I was going to change my flight and go home early. Not to confront Sarah, but to understand what was happening to my marriage. The next morning, I told McKinnon I needed to handle a family emergency. He was understanding, even offered his company jet, but I declined. I needed the time on a commercial flight to figure out what I was going to say and do. The flight from Dallas to Chicago felt like the longest 2.5 hours of my life. I kept checking my phone, hoping Sarah would call or text, hoping for some innocent explanation for everything. But my phone remained silent. I took a cab from O'Hare instead of my usual airport parking shuttle, arriving home just after 2 in the afternoon. Sarah's car wasn't in the driveway, but Emma's little Honda was. I found my daughter in the kitchen, textbooks spread across the table, looking surprised to see me. "Dad? I thought you weren't coming back until tomorrow. Finished early. Where's your mother?" Emma hesitated, and I could see her internal struggle between loyalty to her mother and concern for me. She said she was going to meet her photography instructor. Something about a private lesson. "Do you know where?" "No, but Dad, I don't think she's really taking photography lessons. I mean, maybe she is, but that's not all she's doing." I sat down across from my daughter, this brilliant young woman who looked so much like Sarah at that age. "What do you mean?" "She's been different. Happy in a way she hasn't been in years, but also secretive. And the other day I was in the garage looking for my tennis racket and I found all that camera equipment, but it looked like it had never been used. The boxes weren't even opened. The truth hit me like a physical blow. My wife was having an affair, and she was using photography lessons as a cover. The expensive equipment was just part of the lie, props in an elaborate deception. "Emma, I need you to go to your friend's house for a few hours. Can you call Jessica?" My daughter's eyes filled with understanding and sadness. "Dad, I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault, sweetheart. None of this is your fault." After Emma left, I sat in my living room, the same living room where we'd opened Christmas presents and celebrated birthdays and watched our children take their first steps. I tried to remember when Sarah and I had stopped being happy together. Had it been gradual, like erosion wearing away a coastline, or sudden, like a tree falling in a storm? I realized I didn't even know what my wife's life looked like when I wasn't there. I traveled so much for work, sometimes 2 or 3 days a week. I'd thought she was home reading, maybe meeting friends for lunch, doing the things that satisfied housewives do. Instead, she was living a completely separate life. At 4:30, I heard Sarah's car in the driveway. I stayed on the couch, listening to her footsteps on the front walk, the sound of her key in the lock. She called out as she entered. "Emma? I'm home." I picked up Thai food for dinner. She appeared in the living room doorway and froze when she saw me. For just a moment, guilt flashed across her face before she composed herself. "Mike, you're home early. How was Dallas?" She looked beautiful. That was the thing that hurt the most. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled in a way that took effort, makeup applied with care. She looked like the woman I'd married, the woman I'd fallen in love with in college when she turned heads walking across campus. Dallas was fine. "We need to talk." Something in my tone made her stiffen. "About what?" "About where you've really been spending your time. About the photography equipment you bought but never used. About why you're coming home at 11 p.m. from classes that end at 9. Sarah set down her purse slowly, and I watched her decide how to play this. She could deny everything, get angry, turn it around on me. Or she could tell the truth. "I was going to tell you," she said quietly. "Tell me what, exactly?" She sat down in the chair across from me, the same chair where she used to nurse our babies, where she'd read bedtime stories, where she'd fallen asleep waiting up for me to come home from late nights at the office. "His name is David. I met him at the coffee shop on Ogden Avenue 6 months ago. He's a photographer, teaches workshops at the community center. He's divorced, has 2 kids he sees on weekends." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. I felt strangely calm, like I was watching this happen to someone else. "Are you in love with him?" "I don't know. Maybe. Yes." She was crying now, but quietly, the tears just rolling down her cheeks. "Mike, I've been so lonely. Even when you're home, you're not really here. You're thinking about work, about your next trip, about everything except us. So this is my fault?" "No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we've both let this marriage die. We stopped trying years ago. We became roommates who split the bills and showed up to Emma's soccer games together. I knew she was right, but it didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. Why didn't you just ask for a divorce? Because I was scared. Because it felt like admitting failure. Because I hoped maybe we could find our way back to each other. By sleeping with another man? By remembering what it felt like to have someone actually see me. David notices when I get my hair cut. He asks about my day and actually listens to the answer. When he looks at me, I don't feel invisible. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our backyard where we'd installed a swing set that our grandchildren would never use, at least not together. How long? We've been seeing each other for 2 months. The physical part, I mean. Do you want a divorce? I don't know what I want. I know I can't keep living like this, lying to you, lying to Emma. But Mike, I also can't keep living like we were before. We talked for 3 hours. Not arguing, not accusing, just talking in a way we hadn't in years. Sarah told me about feeling invisible, about watching her friends post happy couple photos on Facebook while we barely spoke during dinner. I told her about feeling like nothing I did was ever enough, about coming home to a house that felt more like a hotel than a home. The photography equipment? I asked. I actually did sign up for classes. I thought maybe if I had something interesting to talk about, something that was just mine, you might notice me again. But then I met David on the first day, and everything changed. That night, Sarah slept in the guest room. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about 23 years of marriage, 2 children, a mortgage, shared friends, family gatherings. How do you untangle a life so completely intertwined? But as I replayed our conversation, something nagged at me. Sarah had always been a terrible liar, blushing and stumbling over her words whenever she tried to deceive anyone. But today, she'd been so calm, so prepared with her answers. And David, the photographer who'd been divorced and had 2 kids he saw on weekends, felt almost too convenient, too much like a story designed to make me feel sorry for him. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I followed my wife. Sarah left the house at 10:30, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater. Instead of heading toward the community center or Ogden Avenue, she drove to Woodfield Mall in Schaumburg. I followed at a distance, feeling ridiculous and guilty but unable to stop myself. She parked near Macy's and walked quickly to the food court, where she sat down at a small table. Within minutes, a man approached her. Tall, athletic, wearing a business suit. This was David the photographer? He looked more like a corporate executive. I found a spot where I could watch them without being seen and observed their interaction. It was intimate, familiar, but not in the way I'd expected. They talked intently, leaning close together, but there was something almost businesslike about their conversation. He handed her an envelope, which she put in her purse without opening. After about 20 minutes, they left separately. Sarah went into Macy's while David walked toward the parking garage. I had a choice to make, follow Sarah or follow David. I chose David. His car had Illinois plates but a rental car sticker. I followed him to a hotel near O'Hare Airport, the Embassy Suites. He went inside, and after a few minutes of internal debate, I followed. The lobby was busy with business travelers and flight crews. I watched David approach the front desk, and after he left for the elevators, I walked over to the desk clerk. Excuse me, I was supposed to meet the gentleman who was just here, but I missed him. Tall guy, dark hair, business suit? Oh, you mean Mr. Phillips? He just went up to his room. Phillips? I thought his name was David. The clerk looked confused and checked his computer screen. David Phillips, room 847. Are you sure you have the right person? My hands were shaking as I walked back to my car. David Phillips, not just David. And he was staying at a hotel, not living in the area. This wasn't a local photographer my wife had fallen for. This was something else entirely. I drove home and went straight to our computer. Sarah was still out, probably actually shopping now. I Googled David Phillips and Chicago and got hundreds of results. But when I added photography, I got something interesting. David Phillips was indeed a photographer, but he was based in Denver, not Chicago. And he specialized in very specific type of photography, private investigation surveillance. My blood turned cold. I clicked on his website and found myself looking at a professional portfolio, but not the kind I'd expected. David Phillips was a private investigator who used photography as cover for surveillance operations. His client testimonials talked about cheating spouses, insurance fraud, corporate espionage. Sarah wasn't having an affair. She had hired a private investigator. The question was, to investigate what? I heard Sarah's car in the driveway and quickly closed the browser. She came in carrying shopping bags and acting more relaxed than she had in months. Find anything interesting? I asked. Just some new clothes for spring. How was your day? I wanted to confront her right then, to demand she tell me why she'd hired a private investigator and what she thought she was going to find. But something held me back. If Sarah was investigating me, what did she think I was hiding? That evening, I called my office and told them I was taking a few personal days. Then I started thinking about my recent behavior, my trips, my late nights at the office. Was there anything that might look suspicious to someone who didn't know the full context? The answer, I realized with growing horror, was yes. There was Rebecca. Rebecca Martinez was a project manager at Morrison & Associates, 15 years younger than me, brilliant, ambitious, and yes, attractive. We'd worked together on several major accounts over the past year, including the McKinnon Industries project. We'd had business dinners, late-night strategy sessions, and she'd traveled with me on 2 client visits. All completely professional, but I could see how someone might misinterpret our relationship. More damning, Rebecca had called my cell phone several times in the evenings, usually about work crises that couldn't wait until morning. And there was the night 3 weeks ago when she'd been having problems with her apartment lease and had called me, upset and needing advice. I talked her through it while sitting in my home office, but the conversation had lasted over an hour and I'd spoken quietly so as not to disturb Sarah. If someone had been tracking my phone calls, monitoring my credit card statements, following my movements, they could easily construct a narrative of an affair. Business dinners could be romantic dinners. Late-night phone calls could be intimate conversations. The hotel charges from business trips could be assignations. But there was no affair. Rebecca was engaged to her college boyfriend and planning a wedding for next fall. Our relationship was purely professional, built on mutual respect and shared expertise. I'd never even been tempted to cross that line. So why had Sarah hired a private investigator? I needed to talk to Rebecca, but I couldn't call her from the house. The next morning, after Sarah left for another mysterious appointment, I drove to a coffee shop in downtown Naperville and called Rebecca from the parking lot. Mike? Is everything okay? You sound strange. I need to ask you something, and it's going to sound bizarre. Has anyone approached you recently asking questions about me? Anyone claiming to be a journalist or a potential client or just someone making conversation? There was a pause. Actually, yes. About 3 weeks ago, this guy came to my office claiming he was writing an article about successful women in consulting. He asked a lot of questions about my career, but also about who I worked with, what my relationships were like with my colleagues. He seemed particularly interested when I mentioned you. Did he give you a name? David something. He had a camera and everything, said he was doing photo portraits to go with the article. I thought it was weird that he never followed up, but I figured the article got killed. My stomach dropped. Rebecca, I think my wife hired a private investigator to follow me. She thinks we're having an affair. What? Mike, that's crazy. You've never even commented on my haircut, let alone made a pass at me. You're like the most boringly professional person I know. I know that, and you know that, but if someone was watching us, listening to our phone conversations without context, looking at our travel schedules, they could make it look like something it's not. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Mike, what are you going to do? I'm going to go home and have a very long conversation with my wife. But when I got home, Sarah wasn't there. Emma was in the kitchen making lunch, and she looked up when I entered with an expression I'd never seen before, disappointment. Dad, we need to talk. What's wrong, sweetheart? I know about Rebecca. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Emma, whatever you think you know. I know you've been having an affair with her. Mom hired someone to prove it, and he did. She showed me the photos last night. What photos? Emma pulled out her phone and showed me a series of pictures. Me and Rebecca at dinner at the Signature Room in Chicago, leaning close together over documents. Me and Rebecca getting into the same car outside a client's office. Rebecca hugging me goodbye after a late meeting, a perfectly innocent professional gesture that looked intimate when frozen in a photograph. Dad, how could you do this to Mom? She loves you so much. She's been crying for weeks. Emma, listen to me very carefully. I am not having an affair with Rebecca. These photos are taken out of context. That dinner was a business meeting with 3 other people, but they cropped out everyone else. That hug was her thanking me for helping her with a work problem. We have never been romantic, never been physical, never been anything other than colleagues. My daughter looked at me with the skepticism of a generation raised on social media, where images could be manipulated and truth was relative. Then why is she calling you at night? Why do you travel together? Why were you at that fancy restaurant? I spent the next hour explaining the reality of business relationships, the innocence of professional friendships, the way photographs could lie by showing only part of the truth. Emma listened, and I could see her beginning to believe me, but I also saw something else, the realization that her parents' marriage was falling apart regardless of whether I was cheating. Does Mom believe you? She asked finally. I don't know. I haven't had the chance to explain. Sarah came home an hour later, and I could see she'd been crying. She had an envelope in her hand, presumably more photos from David Phillips, private investigator and professional destroyer of marriages. Emma, go to your room, she said quietly. Mom, Dad says. Emma, please. Your father and I need to talk. After our daughter left, Sarah sat down at the kitchen table and spread out a dozen photographs. Me and Rebecca in various professional situations, all made to look incriminating by careful cropping and selective timing. I hired David 6 months ago because I was going crazy, Sarah said. You were gone so much, and when you were home, you seemed distant. You'd get these late-night phone calls and speak so quietly I couldn't hear what you were saying. You started buying new clothes, paying more attention to your appearance. All the classic signs. Sarah, look at me. I am not having an affair with Rebecca Martinez or anyone else. The photos are taken out of context. That dinner was with clients. That car ride was to the airport. That hug was her thanking me for professional advice. David Phillips is very good at making innocent situations look guilty. I told her about calling Rebecca, about the fake journalist interview, about the way photographs could lie. Sarah listened, but I could see she wanted to believe the worst. It was easier than believing we'd simply grown apart. If you're not cheating, then why don't I feel like I know you anymore? She asked. Because we stopped talking to each other years ago. Because we've been living parallel lives instead of a shared life. Because somewhere along the way, we forgot how to be married. We talked until Emma came down for dinner, and then we talked some more. Sarah admitted she'd wanted to believe I was cheating because it gave her someone to blame, a reason for why our marriage felt so empty. I admitted I'd been using work as an escape from home, traveling more than necessary, staying late at the office to avoid coming home to silence. What do we do now? Sarah asked. I don't know. Do you want to try to fix this? I don't know if we can. I don't know if we even remember how to be happy together. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. We handled it as amicably as possible, for Emma's sake if nothing else. Sarah kept the house. I moved to a condo downtown. We split custody of Emma's remaining college expenses and agreed to be civil at family events. David Phillips sent Sarah a final bill for his services, $8,000 for 2 months of surveillance, photography, and reporting. I often wondered if he felt any guilt about the marriages he helped destroy, or if he just cashed the checks and moved on to the next case. I never did ask Sarah if she'd actually met someone named David at a coffee shop, or if that whole story had been fabricated to cover up the investigation. Some truths are less important than the healing that comes after. A year later, I ran into Sarah at Emma's graduation from Northwestern. She looked happy in a way I hadn't seen in years, lighter somehow. She was dating a guy named Tom, a high school teacher who coached baseball and made her laugh. I was seeing a woman named Claire, a fellow consultant who understood the demands of travel and deadlines. Do you think we made the right choice? Sarah asked me while we watched Emma receive her diploma. I think we made the only choice we could, I replied. We forgot how to love each other, but at least we remembered how to let go. Emma graduated summa cum laude and gave a speech about resilience, about how sometimes the best thing you can do for the people you love is to stop trying to fix what's already broken. She looked right at Sarah and me when she said it, and I knew our daughter was going to be just fine. The photographer David Phillips had been wrong about one thing: the truth hadn't destroyed my marriage. The truth had simply revealed that the marriage had already been destroyed by years of silence, assumption, and the gradual erosion of intimacy. His photos had been the catalyst, not the cause. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Sarah had just asked me about Rebecca instead of hiring an investigator. If we'd talked about our problems instead of letting them fester in silence. If we'd fought for our marriage instead of building cases against each other. But then I remember the relief I felt signing those divorce papers, the sense of freedom that came with no longer having to pretend everything was fine. Sarah and I had been drowning together for years, pulling each other under with our expectations and resentments and unspoken disappointments. The weight of silence had finally become heavier than the truth, and in the end, that was the only thing that set us free.